All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around. I just wanted to double and triple check my audio this time because last week was pretty intense. What we are going to do this week is we are just going to go back over all the things that we were going to talk about last week, but unfortunately, none of you guys could hear it. You could see my awesome visuals, but without the explanation, that might not have made some sense. So, just a recap. Last Saturday was the vernal equinox, meaning the spring equinox. So, hopefully, you guys have been enjoying the longer daylight times. Of course, providing that you are in the northern hemisphere. If you're in the southern hemisphere, I'm sorry that it's getting darker and staying darker longer, but it's a balance that we all do. So we're going to talk about. Oh, Divya, you didn't miss anything. I was muted the whole time. Luckily, I'm glad that you're here because we're actually going to answer your question as well about the plugs. I found out like more about electrical sockets than I think I ever really wanted to know, but it's something that's so helpful that I haven't really ever thought about. So, thanks for the question, and we're going to talk about that pretty shortly. Um, before we dive into all of that stuff, plugs, the tilt of our planet, the orbit of our planet, we are going to talk about the problem of the weeks for the last 2 weeks. So we are actually going to start with last week's problem first, and then address this week's problem. Because this week's problem is kind of an interesting permutation combination problem. So it might take a little bit longer to go over. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and let me just get started. Sorry, guys. I thought I had everything together. Boop. Okay. Boop, boop. All right. So, last week's problem of the week was a really interesting force question. Basically, you have an 80-kilogram clown that must carry three 10-kilogram rings, which honestly, those are really heavy rings. So I'm kind of mad impressed with this clown that he's able to juggle these. But the bridge that he has to cross can only support 100 kilograms, meaning that the third ring is going to throw him kind of over the weight and cause the bridge to collapse. So anything that experiences a force above its like tensile strength, it's going to actually end up snapping or collapsing. So the lion tamer, I don't know if the lion tamer is trying to purposely mess with the clown, but he told the clown that he could make it across the jug as long as he juggled the rings. But he has to make sure that one is in the air at all times, because if it's in the air and not touching him, technically it's not exerting a force on him, and hence it wouldn't be exerting a force on the bridge. So the clown followed his advice. And the question is, did the bridge support his weight? Well, congratulations, Mark B. You answered the question correctly. He's gonna go swimming with the fishes. Here's what happens. Even though he always has one ring up in the air, the force that it takes him to throw that ring up into the air, the ring is actually going to exert an equal and opposite force back on him in order to leave his hand. So, this is from Newton's third law. So, even though the ring is not being held by him and hence not pushing him down onto the bridge, it is actually going to provide an external force right as it's leaving, which is going to push him over the limit. So let me kind of show you what I mean by that with our favorite thing to do in physics, which is a free body diagram. Okay, so if I was to look at my clown here and, fear my mad art skills. So we have our clown, and all objects exert, or sorry, all objects with mass experience the force of gravity, and gravity always points straight down. So this is going to be the weight of the clown, and that's going to be 80 kilograms times 10 meters per second squared. Now, I'm kind of mad at this problem because it's equating mass with weight, and that's not the case as we talked about extensively 2 weeks ago. Mass is the amount of stuff you have, and it's your measurement of inertia. It's kind of like how much force is it going to take for you to actually experience a change in motion. Whereas weight is the effect of gravity on an object. So we're going to say that instead of the bridge being able to support 100 kilograms of mass, it can actually support 1,000 newtons of weight. Okay, that's the more appropriate, more proper physics way of doing it. Sorry, old physics habits die hard. Then what we're going to have here is we're going to have him holding two rings, and each of those rings are going to have their own weight, which is going to be 10 times 10. So it's 100 newtons. And then this is also going to be 100 newtons. Okay. So far what we have in total is we have 1,000 newtons of force pushing down on the bridge. And this is fine. Then the idea is that he's going to have one ring floating above his head at all times. But that ring is also being pulled down by gravity. And in order for this ring to actually fly up into the air, the clown must have exerted a greater upward force on it. So this is going to be the force of the clown on the ring. So C on R. Okay. By Newton's third law, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So because the clown had to exert this upward force on the ring in order to get it up into the air, that means that the ring is also providing a downward force on the clown as it leaves the clown's hand. So this is going to be the force of the ring on the clown. And these two forces are equal and opposite. Okay. So that means when we're looking at the bridge and we look at our net force on the bridge, what we're going to have to account for is we're going to have to account for the two rings, so 2 times 100, plus the weight of the clown, which is going to be 800 newtons, plus the force of the ring on clown, whatever that force is. What's important right now is that it is a positive force, and it's going to be enough to just push the boundaries of this bridge and cause the poor clown to actually fall through the bridge. Basically, this is going to be greater than 1,000 newtons. Mark also sent me an excellent joke about a guy following a delivery driver, and the delivery driver would get out of his car every couple of miles and hit the side of his truck. And finally, after the third or fourth time of this happening, the car that was following the truck gets out and is like, dude, what are you doing? And the guy's like, hey, this is a 9-ton truck. I've got 12 tons, or I'm sorry, yeah. This is a 9-ton truck. I've got 12 tons of canaries in there, so I got to keep some of them flying at all times. Thinking that that would work. It's a great joke. However, due to the physics of it, in order for anything to be levitating or acting against gravity, it has to have a force exerted on it that's greater than its weight, and hence it is exerting a force, an equal and opposite force on another object. So, unfortunately, our lion tamer caused our clown to go swimming in the drink. Okay? If you guys have any questions on how that really works, please email me at officehours@gmail.com, or you can send me a Facebook message, or you can also tweet me at office hours, or I'm sorry, at OH I couldn't fit all of office hours. I was a little upset about that, but that's okay. All right, so let's talk about the next problem of the week. Oh no. Sorry, my mouse went away. Hold on. Okay. All right. Okay, so for this problem of the week, this is kind of a typical problem, but it's made slightly atypical because we are at a round table. So, okay, it's not quite round, but it's octagonal. So how many different ways, ignoring rotations, can 8 family members seat themselves around an octagonal dinner table? So what we need to do is we need to figure out how many different ways they can arrange themselves, and then figure out a way to get rid of the duplicates. So, okay. So the easiest way to do this is to kind of adapt the slot method for permutations and combinations. And this is what I am talking about. So what I like to do whenever I have to do a permutation type question is I just kind of draw it out. And then what you do with the slots is you ask yourself how many possibilities are there for that particular slot. So we are going to set this as our beginning seat. All right. So this is kind of like the first chair that we are going to assign to someone. Now there are 8 family members in total. And what we're going to do is we are also ignoring rotations. And I'll talk about what ignoring rotations. And I'll talk about how we account for that in one moment. So, because there are 8 family members, there are 8 possible choices for that first seat. Then for the next seat, there are 7, then 6, then 5, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. All right. So the way we calculate this number of possibilities is we simply multiply these numbers together. So what we have here is we actually have 8 factorial, which equals 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And that's going to equal 40,320. Now, I'm not going to lie, I totally did that on a calculator. But if you don't have a calculator, one thing you could do is you could also like rearrange the numbers to kind of group them together to make your life a little bit easier. So, like, for example, uh, you could group like 8 and 5 to make 40. So that gives you a 0. But honestly, I'm just using a calculator right here. We have a lot to talk about today. So, taking some shortcuts. Now, we said that we were going to ignore rotations. So, what that means is we have some repeats of seating arrangements here. So, the way we ignore the repeats is we ask ourselves how many different starting positions could we have? And that's going to be 8 because I could start here, or I could have started at this seat, or I could have started here, 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 or here. No matter where I would have started, that could have created, I would have gotten the same 8 factorial rounds. So what we want to do to find our final value is we actually want to take our 8 factorial and then divide it by the number of rotations, which is 8. And when we do that, we get 5,040 arrangements. So if you have some family members who don't necessarily get along, you can always get a circular table or an octagonal table, and I'm sure there's a few arrangements in there that would guarantee that they don't have to sit next to each other. They might have to stare at each other across the dinner table, but at least they won't be sitting next to each other, elbowing each other the whole time. If you guys have any questions about more like permutation combination type problems, and especially when it comes to like probability, or we also saw this with the binomial theorem and a couple of weeks ago with Pascal's triangle. Um, the Pascal's triangle kind of lets us know one of the combination values for helping us set up, um, helping us expand binomials raised to a certain power. So if you have any questions about that, again, please feel free to email me at officehourswithml@gmail.com, Facebook message me, or tweet me at OHWithML. All right, I look forward to hearing your questions. They inspire me to make different videos, and also they inspire me for the stream. Because, you know, it's if I don't get questions from you guys, I just look into things that interest me, and that's not always interesting to everyone else, and I really want to know what you're interested in. So, all right. Speaking of questions, I received this question like, oh my gosh, at this point, like a month ago, and I'm so sorry, Divya, that it took me so long to answer it. Um, but Divya posted a really interesting question about plugs. I don't know if you guys have taken some time and really looked at an electrical plug, but they have these weird holes in the prongs. And but yet some plugs don't. And also if you go over to Europe, their plugs and sockets are a completely different shape. And the question is, why? Why do we have those little holes if they um, don't really do anything? So I did some research. I didn't find any definitive answers because, frankly, no one really knows. Um, but I did stumble across like a pretty interesting resource if you're interested in learning more. So let's take a look at it. Let me pull it up. Okay. My mouse keeps going away. Okay. Sorry. My mouse keeps disappearing when I'm screen sharing. Boop, boop. Okay. All right. So, in North America, our electrical plugs tend to be two-pronged or three-pronged. It is better if your plugs are three-pronged, because then that means it is um, a grounded appliance. And grounding is really, really important because the way electricity works, it's the flow of electrons or electric charge through different substances. And when the electrons kind of gather up and they want to be spread out as far as possible. So sometimes we get like static discharge. You might have experienced this when you run your feet up against a carpet and then you like touch your little brother and shock him. Super fun. 100% recommend doing. You might have also seen this if you bring an electric plug close to a socket and there's a little spark in between. That's actually the flow of the electrons arcing between the plug and the socket. So having that grounding wire gives those electrons a safe manner to run to the ground or run to Earth. That being said, it doesn't necessarily mean that your device is not safe if it's two pronged. The vast majority of a lot of our, like everyday appliances are two pronged, so don't worry about it. Um, but some of our prongs have holes and some don't. So the question is, they still work, and why do we have these little holes? So, one of the major theories behind these little holes is the fact that back in the day when we were first designing electrical sockets, they actually had these little like push pins in the socket to hold the plug in place. So, when you insert the plug into the socket, the first parts here, like these little parts, let me go to here. Hold on. Hey. Sorry. Okay. These little parts here would kind of push those push pins back and then they would come back in. In fact, first, before the holes, it was actually like an indentation in the sides of the prongs. And then another company developed the holes, and they were kind of like right place, right time, because they designed this plug design right when North America really wanted a standard design for their electrical plugs and sockets. And so, even though the sockets nowadays do not have these little um, don't have these little pistons that kind of come out to hold the plug in place, we still have these holes because it is on the standard design patent that is approved for electronic device manufacturing here in North America. Go figure. So the main theory behind this is that it is a leftover from a previous patent and it just got standardized. And so then the question is like, well, if we don't need it, wouldn't it actually be cheaper for companies to not manufacture um, them? And honestly, the amount of money that they would save on not having the holes would actually be taken up on the fact that they would be using the metal material to fill the holes in. And also, all of their manufacturing machines are already set to do this. So it's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Um, Another kind of crazy theory is that these holes were designed so you could put a padlock on your plug which would prevent people from powering up your device. And it was like a security measure or something. Um, this this theory is mostly not accepted, simply because you just have to do like one of those like really tiny padlocks that you can almost like rip apart with your bare hands, to fit in here. And also it's just not a really good security measure. So yeah, basically these holes serve no purpose. They're here just because it's standard. And the big evidence for that claim is the fact that here in North America, we have blades that come out. We have flat prongs with a circular ground to fit our sockets. But elsewhere in the world, they have different style of plugs, and their devices work just fine. So those holes are not necessary for the flow of electricity. If you want to find out more about plugs and sockets, there's actually a digital plug and socket museum. Here's the URL for it. And they literally have information about every type of plug and socket in in the world, not just the United States, but like in the world. And I believe it's just like one dude who's just kind of passionate about this, and he has compiled all that information together. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't gender them. I don't know, but it's one person who has put this all together and posted it online for anyone to visit. So you don't need tickets, and you don't have to be a plug to go in. Anyone can find out more about electric sockets if they want to. So there's some really interesting designs around the world, and I kind of want to look into, like what led to the standard design, unless it was just kind of like our design. It was just right time, right place, and someone was like, that looks great, let's do it. So it's hard to say. But yeah, that might be the subject of a little video later on. Yeah, a person passionate about specifically electric sockets. I know. Everyone has um there's someone for everything out there, which is great. Okay. So I hope that answered your question, Divya. I'm sorry that I couldn't give you a definitive answer, but frankly, it's kind of one of those things that I guess is just lost to the annals of time. Yeah. But please keep these questions coming. I am so excited to learn about different things. And yeah, my pleasure. Like, I never knew uh, all the different designs. And also, like, I never knew that the electric sockets used to have kind of those. If you've ever put together, like, IKEA furniture or anything that has like poles on it, it's those little like push sockets that kind of keeps everything in place. Um, I guess what we use now is we just use pure friction, where we just kind of like press metal against the metal prongs, and it works, which is kind of fascinating if you think about it. All right, so with that, let's talk about the vernal equinox. So, last Saturday was the vernal equinox, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the extra sunlight. I know I certainly have. It's been really nice having the sun set later and later in the year. And that is because we are in about this part of the Earth's rotation about the sun. And that means for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, a greater percentage of the northern hemisphere is actually being illuminated by the sun every day. So then, once we pass the summer solstice, which is going to be the longest day of the year, then the tilt of the earth causes a little bit less of the northern hemisphere to be exposed to the sun. And then when we reach the autumnal equinox, that is equal day and night time. So both the equinoxes have equal day and night. And then finally, when we are at the winter solstice, you can see here that more of the earth is tilted away from the sun, and therefore we have those short days. So our seasons and our weather are mostly caused by the tilt of the earth. Without the tilt of the earth, we actually would not have our seasons, and we also wouldn't be able to really have a concept of a year or time. So the ancients, man, since time has begun, realized this pattern in the amount of time that the sun was in the sky. So please note that the solstices, summer, winter, are switched for the southern hemisphere simply because of the way the tilt is. So, like in winter or Christmas in the northern hemisphere, we experience cold Christmases. You know, lakes are frozen over. Um, it's all about the cozy, the wood fire, that sort of thing. Whereas down in Australia at Christmas, it's the peak of summer, baby. So every Christmas, they have surfing Santas. And a couple years ago, I think they set a Guinness Book of World Record, and they had like over 300 Santas surfing um, off. I think it was like Adelaide or some place like that in Australia. And I think that is just like so cool that they do that. So everywhere has their own traditions because of the weather. And so even though we are experiencing one type of weather, the southern hemisphere is experiencing kind of like the flip. And I am so sorry. I have to blow my nose because I am so congested. Sorry. Okay. But it's also like if you play Animal Crossing, it is probably really awesome for you to have friends in the southern hemisphere, because then you can get like all the resources you need twice as fast. You don't have to wait for winter. You can just hop on over to your friend down in the southern hemisphere and make your snow boys and get your snowflakes there. um but yeah, super into Animal Crossing. Would love to see everyone's islands. So it's just a super super fun thing. Okay. So, because of this tilt, the sun actually rises and sets in a different location every day. You probably haven't really noticed this because it is a very gradual shift across the horizon. But our ancestors realized this, and actually, that's how they established calendars. Um, it is a very, very popular theory right now that Stonehenge is actually a giant solar calendar. If you look at it from the sky, it is a perfectly circular structure, and there was a huge like gangplank or like a walkway leading up to the stones. And I believe it's on the summer solstice. The sun actually rises directly on that walkway and then sets opposite. So structures like Stonehenge would allow priests and priestesses or druids to go there. They would see where the sun is rising between which stones, and then they would be able to advise farmers on when to plant their crops, when to harvest, or knowing the pattern of the sun and the moon allowed them to establish holidays and different types of events. All of our holidays are really based around solar and lunar positions because we noticed a pattern between the solar and lunar positions and the weather and what we could do at that time. So during the summer solstice for us, the northern hemisphere is um, experiencing more sunlight. And actually, up here in the Arctic Circle, there are some parts of the far north that actually experience 24 hours of sunlight. So if you go above the Arctic Circle, you'll experience this thing called the midnight sun, where it literally does not set. It gets very, very close to the horizon, and this red color is caused by the scattering of light from through Earth's atmosphere. And then the payoff of that, of getting 24 hours of sun during the summer, is in winter the sun barely peaks above the horizon. So, there's like a lot of vampire movies about the far north where like winter is their time because, vampires don't go out in the sun. But like they definitely would have to migrate in the summer because they would just be dusted the whole time. Um, but yeah, it's kind of really cool to see these time lapses. I actually had the privilege of going up to Norway during the summer, and we went above the Arctic Circle, and it's just wild that at like 2 in the morning it's still daylight outside. It's not the bright sunlight of the day because it's kind of dusky and rosy, but it is stunningly beautiful to see. So, not only is the Earth tilted, but it actually moves in an elliptical orbit, not a circular one. The evidence for this is pretty resounding. This type of picture is called an analemma, and it shows the position of the sun at high noon throughout the year. If the Earth moved in a circular orbit and if the Earth was not tilted, the sun would rise and set in the same spot every day, and it would always be in the same position. Because of the tilt of the Earth, we see that the sun actually progresses around. The evidence for the elliptical orbit is the fact that these spacings are not equal. Basically, around here, the sun is, or sorry, the Earth is actually moving faster around the Earth than here. The Earth is actually moving slower around the Earth. What causes this is when the Earth is a little bit further away from the sun, it actually moves slower. And then when it's a little bit closer, it kind of gets slungshot around the Earth. So let me show you how to make an ellipse really quick. Yeah, let me show you how to make an ellipse. And then we're gonna look at a little bit why we get like how we know, and is it okay that we approximate it as a circle. Okay, so what I have here is just a box. My daughter loves her KiwiCo crates. So A circle is defined as a set of all points that are the same distance from one other point. So to do this, I have my central point here, and then I'm going to take a bit of string that I just tied into a loop, and I'm going to hold the string pretty tight, and then I can just move it around. Now, the string does stretch, so that's why we don't get a perfect circle. But an ellipse is caused by having two focal points that are a certain distance apart. And I do the same thing with my string. I just have my circle or my loop, and then I kind of draw them around here. I think I need to provide a little bit more. There we go. There we go. Now we can kind of see it. Okay. So the further apart these focuses are from one another, the more eccentric our ellipse becomes. Also, the long distance between my focal points is called my major axis. If I decide to do a pretty close ellipse or pretty close major axis, but vertically, we should see that my ellipse is going to be more vertical. So actually, let's do it like this. Oops. When you put your focal points in, you want to make sure that your pins do not catch your string, because if they do, you won't be able to move your string around. So, oops. And so we see here that we don't quite get a circle. I keep hitting the camera. We don't quite get a circle, but we get kind of like a smushed circle there. So the Earth's orbit is elliptical, but it is nearly circular. So when we look at it, it's generally when we look for the distance from Earth to the Sun, we're taking the average of the two distances here. One thing that's really interesting to note is that our North American winter, or our Northern Hemisphere winter, excuse me, our Northern Hemisphere winter, it occurs actually when we are the closest to the Sun. So this just goes to show how important that tilt of the Earth is. That's what decides our temperature, not our proximity to the Sun. And in fact, our summer is when we are furthest away from the Sun, and that's when we experience the higher temperatures, simply because we are exposed to that solar energy for longer. I also looked up like average temperatures in Australia to see if maybe during their summer it's a lot higher than ours. And it actually isn't. It's pretty much the same as your typical North American summer. So, really, distance from the sun doesn't affect our temperature or our weather patterns as much as the tilt of our Earth. The amount of time that we are able to absorb that solar energy, that solar radiation, that's what affects our weather patterns. So, what we are going to do is we are going to investigate like how much does that elliptical pattern kind of like affect what we know about Earth's orbit around the sun. So let me, sorry, I want to do this. Perfect. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to do a quick calculation here. And we want to see if we were to approximate the Earth's orbit as a circle, would we actually get the right distance between Earth and the sun? And so here's how we do it. If an object is moving around in a circle, it has to experience some sort of force. In the case of the planets, the only force acting on the planets is gravity. And Newton's universal law of gravitation states, I want to get into the corner. Okay. That, ooh, this is not the right marker. That would have been a disaster. Okay. Newton's universal law of gravitation states that the force of gravity equals the gravitational constant times the mass of the sun times the mass of the earth divided by the square of the distance between them. Okay. Now, we don't have a force probe big enough to measure the gravitational force. But what we do know is that the gravitational force is providing a center-seeking force, forcing that object to move around a circle. So what I mean by that is objects want to naturally move in a straight line. Okay? If they experience any sort of center-seeking force or like kind of a pull, they're going to move in a circle. So let me show you a quick demonstration with that. Where did it go? Hold on. I totally forgot something. I will be right back. Okay. All right, so sorry about that. I just had to go get some string. I thought I had some in here, and I don't, because I forgot that my daughter had moved them. So, for this demonstration, you need a wiffle ball, some string, a straw, in my handy dandy bag of extras. You need a straw, and then you need some sort of weights. Washers work really, really well because they have a hole in them. So if you have some washers, that works really well. Okay. So again, objects want to go in a straight line unless acted on by a center-seeking force. So if I throw this ball up into the air, it's going to just move in a straight line. Okay. I am so not athletic, so please don't laugh too hard if I miss this ball. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to throw it. I'm sorry, I'm going to string some yarn through through the holes. It's a little bit finicky. And then I'm using one of my Cricut weeding tools to kind of hook it. Oh, there we go. There we go. Come on. Come on. You can do it. Okay. All right. So once you have it strung through it, you just kind of want to tie a knot or two. All right. Now, if I put like a little upward force, but then if I keep applying that force, the ball no longer moves straight up and down. It's actually going to move in a circle. And the circle that it makes is actually affected by how much force you're applying on this string. So to kind of see that, what we're going to do is we're going to take our straw and we're going to string our yarn through our straw. I'm actually going to cut the straw a little bit. You kind of just need enough to hold on to the straw so that way it doesn't yeah. Excuse me. So that way you can kind of hold it and turn it. Now, one thing you can see here is that if I hold it and I have a large radius, the speed is like this. But then if I just pull the string, shortening the radius but applying the same, it's actually going to be a faster spin. And then what you can do is you can kind of experiment with these different weights by first like putting, okay, one weight on the end. Actually, we're going to put two weights on the end. Do, 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 do. Kind of have two weights on the end. Okay, so I just have those weights on here. And then what I can do is as I spin the ball around, the weights actually come up. So again, I'm going to show you that again. So the weights are hanging down, but as you spin the ball, it's experiencing a force, so that actually pulls the weights up, which is kind of cool. So just one more time. When you spin it, it's exerting that force. So in order to move in any sort of circular motion, you need to have a center-seeking force of some sort, be it a tension force on a string or gravitational force, like with the planets. So let's get back to the planets. Okay. So what I have here is I have our information for the sun, and also I have the amount of time it takes the Earth to go about the sun. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, like, look, gravity is providing this center-seeking force. And the centripetal force can be found by taking the mass of the object that's rotating times its linear velocity squared over the radius of its revolution, or r. In this case, these two r's are exactly the same. Okay, so that's going to kind of help us not have too many distances here. Another really cool thing is that the mass of the Earth, or the mass of the object that's doing the rotation, cancels out. So we can use this no matter what planet we're talking about. What really affects things is the linear speed. But let's take a little side note on linear speed for a second. The Earth is not going in a straight line, but rather it's going around in a circle. So we need to think about something called angular speed. And angular speed is found from your linear speed by taking your radius and multiplying it by omega. Your linear speed is your radius times your angular speed. Now, the angular speed is how fast you're doing one rotation. So one rotation is once around the circle, or in other words, that's 2 pi radians. And then that's going to be divided by your orbital period, or the amount of time it takes you to actually go around the sun. One thing to note, we need that orbital period to be in seconds, not days. The reason for that is this constant right here. Because this constant is given to us in Newton times meter squared over kilogram squared, that's kind of setting our time to be in seconds, our weight to be, our mass to be in kilograms, and our distance to be in meters. So we're going to have to make that adjustment. So when I actually replace V with all of this right here, I need to remember to square it. This is what we have. So we're going to have G mass of the sun over R squared equals R squared times 4 pi squared over R T squared. Okay, so the R squared and the 4 pi squared and T squared come from the fact that we are squaring this expression right here. Because we're multiplying and dividing, I can just distribute the square, and that's perfectly legal. So what I want to do is I want to solve this for R. So it is so important to simplify before we multiply or do anything like that. So I can simplify this R and this square. And then what I can do is I want the variable that I'm solving for to be in the numerator. Always, always, always. So that means if I multiply both sides by R squared, these R squares are going to cancel out, and then these two are going to come together to become R to the third. So I'm going to have G ms equals R to the third times 4 pi squared over T squared. I wrote it like this because now I need to get rid of this 4 pi squared over T squared. So the best way to get rid of a fraction is to multiply by its reciprocal. So the reciprocal just means we flip the fraction over. But what I do to one side of the equation, I must do to the other side of the equation. And then, finally, last but not least, I'm going to get R cubed, and I'm just switching the sides that they're on, equals gravitational constant times mass of the sun times the orbital period squared all over 4 pi squared. Now we can plug in our values. But before we plug them in, I have the orbital period in days, not in seconds. So we're going to have to do that conversion, and we can do that conversion down here. So whenever you want to do a unit conversion, I find it really, really helpful to do it in a grid. And what I mean by that is you're going to take what you're starting with. Oops, excuse me. It's 365.25 days. So our calendar is based off how long it takes us to rotate about the sun once. However, the ancients believed it was 365 days. And so they were noticing that the patterns year to year, every 4 years, they kind of started shifting a little bit. And that's because it the orbit or the day as we have described it, which is how long it takes the Earth to rotate once on its own axis. The revolution of Earth is not in whole rotations of Earth. So we're kind of off by about a quarter of a day. And so that's why we have a leap year every 4 years. It's just to kind of account for that little extra day. So little tidbit there. Okay. I want to go from days to seconds. I do not know how many seconds are in a day right off the top of my head. But I do know that one day equals 24 hours. So with this conversion method, what you want to do is you want to write one side of your conversion either on the top of your grid or on the bottom of your grid. And you want to choose the location properly so that way your units cancel out. So because I have days here, what I want to do is I want to write one day on the bottom and then 24 hours on the top. By doing that, days cancel, leaving me with hours, which is great. Once I have hours, I can now go from hours to seconds. I do know that 1 hour equals 3,600 seconds. So again, because hour is on the top of my grid, I want to make sure I write 1 hour on the bottom and 3,600 seconds on the top. So hours cancel, and then I'm left with seconds, which is exactly what I want. Then what I do is I multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom, and divide both of them. In this case, I don't really need to worry about the bottom because it's just 1. And when you multiply anything by 1, you get 1. And I'm going to use my favorite piece of technology to do this. So we are going to go 365.25 times 24 times 3,600 to get 3,100. Okay, 3,155,7,600 seconds. 31,557,600 seconds. Anyways, so that would be how many seconds are in 1 year. And you know what? Actually, now that I think about it, I probably did know the number of seconds in a day because of Seasons of Love from Rent. But I digress. So that is going to be my T value that I'm going to plug in. And so now I am fully ready to just plug in all my values into R cubed. So I am going to have 6.67 times 10 to the negative 11 times, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. Eventually, I'll get this figured out. Okay. Times the mass of the sun. It's a big boy, 1.989 times 10 to the 30th. I swear that's a 3. Times the orbital period squared. Oh gosh. I do not have enough room for this. Okay. We're going to make an executive decision here. I'm going to do it underneath. Okay. So, R cubed equals 6.67 times 10 to negative 11 times, we're going to just do 2 times 10 to the 30th. It's fine. Times 31,557,600 seconds squared, all divided by 4 pi squared. Now, when you're plugging this into your calculator, you want to be really, really careful that you put your denominator in parentheses. A really common mistake when making this calculation is to multiply everything across in the numerator just to kind of plug it in, which you totally can do. Then you hit divide, and then you just type in 4 pi squared. When you do that, you're only dividing the numerator by 4 and then multiplying everything by pi squared, which is so not what we want. What we want to do is we want to multiply everything in the numerator and then divide it, the whole thing, by 4 pi squared. So by putting the parentheses around it, that's going to guarantee that we get the right measurement. So pardon me while I do a little bit of plugging and chugging. So I'm going to put on some music so that way you guys don't have to just hear my button presses. Oops. Okay. All right. I'm also going to be using the E function on my calculator because it's just really nice because it guarantees the times 10. I don't have to think about it, and I just like it a lot better. It's a lot more elegant. 5, 7, 6 squared divided by parentheses 4 pi squared. Close that parenthesis. Okay. Why do I keep wanting to use that marker? Oh my gosh. Okay, so we get r cubed equals 3.365 times 10 to the 33 meters. Now, do we want r cubed? No. I'm going to just turn this down even more. Actually, I think I want... Let's try this. Okay. Okay, here we are. So, do we want r cubed? No. We want r. So what we have to do is we have to get rid of that cubed. And so to do that, we're actually going to take the cubed root. So whenever you're taking a root, what you're actually doing is you're raising your value to a fractional exponent. So if I want to get rid of the third power, I need to raise it to the 1/3, because 3 times 1/3 is going to be 1. And so technically it cancels it out. So then when I do that, I get r equals, again, I'm going to just use the answer feature because I don't want to, I don't want to have to retype that. And also rounding leads to errors. So, even though I totally rounded the mass of the sun. Shh, no one noticed. Okay, so anyways, to do the third root, you're going to hit the power button. So we should get answer raised a little bit, and then we're just going to type 1 divided by 3. That's going to take the third root of that huge response. And what we get is we get 1.498 times 10 to the 11 meters. So if we take a look at our awesome slide here. excuse me. If we see 1.49 times 10 to 11 meters is actually the average of these two distances. So this is the perihelion, which means the closeness to the sun, the closest distance to the sun. And then this value here is the aphelion, or the furthest distance from the sun. Helio means sun, peri means close. I guess ap means far away. So oftentimes we quote this average distance of 1.49 times 10 to 11 meters because, again, Earth's orbit is basically circular. So what about for planets where their orbit is definitely more elliptical than circular? Does it really affect our data numbers? So we're going to take a look at Mercury, because Mercury has one of the most elliptical orbits of the planets, mostly because it's so snorking close to the sun. It's a mere 66 billion meters away from the sun. And yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to calculate how long Mercury's year is as if it was a circle. And then we're going to compare that to the actual value of 88 Earth days. Okay? So just to kind of remind you where we are at. Sorry, gotta do this. Okay. So we're going to kind of set up the same idea, except now, actually, I'm just going to go all the way back to the beginning. Instead of mass of the Earth, we're going to have mass of Mercury. And it doesn't really matter because it just cancels out. Okay? So, welcome to the math side of physics. I'm glad you guys are here. So, here's what we do. We want to solve for time. We want to figure out what the orbital period is. So, we're going to make the same replacement of V with R times 2 pi over T. So when I do that, I get GMS over R squared equals R squared times 4 pi squared. Gotta remember that square. Divided by R times T squared. Okay. So basically I'm going to try and get T by itself. And I also notice that T is in the denominator. So that might cause some pause, but I'm going to show you a pretty awesome trick once we kind of isolate it a little bit further. So I can definitely simplify that. And then I'm going to basically divide this side, or I'm sorry, I'm going to multiply it by 1 over R times 4 pi squared, just to get rid of all of that. But what I do to one side, I have to make sure I do to the other. R 4 pi squared. And again, this radius, we are assuming the distance from the sun, we're assuming a circular orbit. Okay? So, yeah, we're just going to use that as our distance. So what I get is I get GMS over 4 pi squared R cubed. And actually, I do want to check. Just want to make sure I don't have any like comments on Facebook. Okay, it doesn't look like it. Okay, cool. Equals 1 over t squared. Now, again, our goal variable is in the denominator, which makes it hard to solve for. If I was to solve this left-hand side, I wouldn't be solving for t. I'd be solving for 1 over t squared. And that's basically the inverse or the reciprocal of what I want. So, handy dandy little trick. Whenever you want to solve for something in the denominator, flip it. As long as whatever you do to one side, you do to the other, it's math legal, baby. So what we get then is we get t squared equals 4 pi squared r cubed over gravitational constant times the mass of the sun. Okay. We're going to go ahead and leave it as t squared. We will do the square root as the final calculation. I like to break it down into steps like this just to make sure that I don't make an error or I don't oversimplify somewhere. We could... Yeah, because like if I take the square root, I could kind of simplify it. But because we're just doing a straight evaluation, it doesn't really help anything. If you're taking like AP Physics 1, where they expect you to do a lot of algebraic manipulation, you might actually want to take the square root, simplify it as much as you possibly can. If you're interested in those types of techniques, basically algebra techniques for physics, please drop me a comment or send me an email or a Facebook message or a tweet and let me know that that's something you're interested in, and I will for sure make a video about that. Because all of these tips and tricks come from years and years of practice basically doing these problems. So we're going to go ahead and evaluate this. So the square of the orbital period is going to be 4 times pi squared times the distance of Mercury from the sun, which is 66.31 times 10 to the 6 meters. Oh, I don't need to put the unit here. Do, do, do. 6.67 times 10 to negative 11 times the mass of the sun, which again, I'm going to just estimate it as 2 kilograms. Now, again, because of the gravitational constant, the orbital period that we get is going to be in seconds. So before we like freak out thinking that we've done something wrong, we need to convert that into days to compare it to the 88 days. Okay? So just warning you, because we're about to get a very, very large number, and it might freak some people out at first. So now that I've plugged everything in, I'm going to go ahead and calculate it. So I go 4 pi squared times 6.67. Oh, what am I doing? Times 66.31 e to the 6. Okay, then divided by parentheses 6.67 e to the negative 11 times 2 times e to the 30th. What? Oh my gosh, I didn't cube. Oh, I got like to 1 to the negative 11 seconds, and I was like, what? Again, years and years of experience, and I still sometimes drop negatives or forget to cube things. I mean, it happens. So let me try that again. So we got 4 pi squared times 66.31 e to the 6. I gotta drop some parentheses around that because I'm about to raise it to the 3rd, divided by 6.67 e to the negative 11 times 2e to the 30th. None of that is squared. Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Whew! I was about to get really worried there for a second. So we get t squared equals 86286.13. Because the rest is just like 9. And that's seconds squared, technically. Now that's t squared. I want t. So I got to take the square root of all that. So to get rid of that square, we're going to take the square root. I'm sorry that I'm so congested. It's spring, which is lovely, but that just then means this just becomes a mess. So 293.74 seconds. Why is that? I did it earlier and it worked out. Because that is definitely not a day. I did something horribly wrong, and I'm trying to figure out what I did horribly wrong. One moment. Enjoy this kind of eerie music while you wait. Now I'm getting a very different one. Okay, well, awkward sauce. So when it's not working out, that means we should just kind of go back to the beginning. So sorry. Again, like I said, I did it perfectly before and off camera, and I don't know what's my malfunction right now. But it happens to the best of us. So let's see. We're going to take a slightly different approach. We're going to say that this is m v squared over r. And then we know that v equals r omega. So v squared is going to equal r squared omega squared. Right? That makes sense to me. I think that's fine. And then we know that omega is going to be 2 pi divided by the orbital period. So then that means that v squared is going to be r squared times 2 pi over t squared. So then that's going to be r squared times 4 pi. Okay, I think I see one mistake. I think I forgot about that r squared. Okay. So then we get g mass of the sun over r squared. I know I'm just filling you guys with confidence with my algebra skills, but I swear they're there. So then we have r squared 4 pi squared over t squared. Okay. Over r. Really important because that r is right there. So this r cancels that square. And then I can move this r over to become r cubed. Mass over r cubed equals 4 pi squared over t squared. So then I divide both sides by 4 pi squared. So that's just that. Equals 1 over t squared. Okay. Then I'm going to do a flip to flip on both of them because I want to solve for t squared. Or if I wanted to make it official, what I could do is I could cross multiply. Okay, let's not take any shortcuts. Let's do it properly. So t squared times gms equals 4 pi squared r cubed. And then I'm going to divide by gms, which is totes my goats what I had. What the hey? And g is to the negative 11, right? Okay, and m is to the 30th. Oh my god. Ugh. Sorry, everyone. I totally read that 10 to the 9 as 10 to the 6. I think I need to go get my eyes checked. Because that is very clearly a 10 to the 9, and that makes sense, because I even made the joke that it's a paltry 66 billion. I did all those calculations with 10 to the 6. Okay, at least I figured out what happened. It was not my algebra skills, it was just the fact that I did not read properly. So, mystery solved. We have t squared equals 4 pi squared r cubed. See, this is what happens when you try and do math really late at night, but unfortunately, this is like the only time I have to stream because of life. So, we do what we can. I appreciate you all sticking with me and not laughing too hard at my mistakes. Okay, so then t squared is going to equal 4 pi squared times 66.31 times 10 to the 9. So mad. I hate it when it's little mistakes like that. That's why I kind of failed at coding. Because like I could get the overall idea of like what I want a computer program to do, but I will always like make those little keystroke errors that are just crippling to the program. So I admire the attention to detail that coders have, because like, sweet Lord, it's intense. Okay. So we got 4. Wow. Pi squared times 66.31 e to the 9th. Drop some parents around that. Divided by parentheses 6.67 e to negative 11 times 2 e to the 30th. Excuse me. It's allergies, not COVID. It's allergies, I swear. Okay, that is making a lot more sense. So when we plug this into our handy dandy calculator, we get 8.63 times 10 to the 13. That's a very large number, but please remember that this is t squared. So we need to take the square root of that in order to solve for t. So when I take the square root of that, I'm like, oh, okay. 9289032.779. But also remember that that is seconds. And we generally measure orbital periods in terms of Earth days or Earth years, because frankly, Earth is where we live, and so while we are not a geocentric solar system, we kind of use Earth as a metric for other planets. So sorry if you're a Martian watching this, or on any other planet. It's just because this is where we live and this is where we're taking our measurements from. So we're going to go ahead and take this seconds, and we are going to convert that into days. So this is the opposite conversion that we did earlier in the stream. So we are going to go from seconds to hours. And again, it was 1 hour equals 3,600 seconds. So that means I put 1 hour on top and the 3,600 seconds on the bottom because I want seconds to cancel out. I don't want hours, I want days, because that's going to be a better unit of measurement for orbital periods. And there are 24 hours in one day. So hours cancel out, leaving me with days. So let's see if our hard work paid off and if we're even remotely close to the actual Mercurian year. Or would it be mercurial? Anyways, the year for Mercury. So I'm going to divide this by 36,000 times 24, making sure I put parentheses around those two. And then I get 107 days. The actual year of Mercury is 88 days. If I want to find the error of this estimation, what I do is I take the experimental minus the actual, and then I'm going to divide it by the actual amount. So I'm going to go 107 minus 88 divided by 88. And that is almost an error of about 22%. And if you are in like high school physics or college physics, oftentimes in your lab, whenever you have to do a percent error, you're like, I hope that's okay. And in a lab, generally, that's okay as long as you can explain where this error came from. If you are a rocket scientist or you are trying to plan a trajectory of a rover to land on a planet, this is so not okay. So, the fact that we approximate the orbits as circles, we only do this in like a high school or maybe like an undergraduate sense, just because it's like good enough. But it does introduce an enormous amount of error depending on the eccentricity of the orbit. The more elliptical the orbit, the larger the error. And there are math techniques that we have in order to account for this eccentric orbit. So an ellipse can be defined by an equation just like a circle can. And so we can still do our integrals, do our derivatives, and make precise calculations no matter how eccentric the orbits are. So, yeah. The other question that I was kind of thinking of as I was coming up with like these demo calculations, I was like, well, how the heck do we know how far the planets are from each other or the sun is? The ancients had their techniques, and I'm not really going to go into it today because we've kind of already done a lot of math, and it's like 10:30, so my brain's a little fried on that. But our modern method is we actually send a radar pulse. And radar is electromagnetic radiation, and all electromagnetic radiation travels at the speed of light. And what we do is we send the pulse out and we bounce it off the object and we measure the time it takes it to go there and bounce back. So, for example, if I wanted to actually figure out how far away the sun is, or how long it would take a radar signal to reach Earth from a planet, for example. Oh, I'm sorry. This is distance from the sun. Excuse me. So these distances, this is the aphelion and the perihelion. This is how far Earth is away from the sun. Please notice that it's 10 to the 6 kilometers. So I'm going to have to add a 3 to each of these when I do my calculations. Or actually, no, I won't, because we're going to keep it. No, I will, because speed is in meters. So the way this works is we have, hold on, I need to see where the board is. Okay. The way we would find, say, the distance to the sun, or how long it would take, is, let's say we have our sun. Okay. And then we have the Earth. Mighty fine Earth, you might say. Round. Sorry, I have to. I'm a product of my time. And if you're like, what is that? That probably means that you missed the formative new ground internet. So it's when flash videos were like a thing. So what we do from our little radar tower is we send out a signal. And then that signal hits the sun and bounces back to Earth. And what we do is we measure the time it takes the signal to travel there and back again. And then we do just a really simple speed calculation. So speed is simply your distance divided by time. And so let's say we are at the perihelion, or the closest spot from the sun. So my speed then, oh wait, I want to figure out how long. So I'm looking for time. So I'm actually going to manipulate this first in order to figure out time. Now, time is in the denominator here. So one little trick that I always use, if you don't have another fraction, flipping it sometimes can be a little confusing. But what we could do is we could just switch my denominator with the left side of my equal sign. If you just have a number on the left-hand side and your desired variable is in the denominator, just switch it out. So then that's going to give me time equals distance divided by speed. So again, let's say that we are at the perihelion, which is at 147.3 times 10 to the 6 kilometers. But my speed of light is in meters. So meters per second. So I need to change my distance into meters. In order to use these equations in physics, your units have to match, or else you get disaster. Like in 1999 when NASA and Lockheed Martin didn't talk about units. And they programmed a Mars lander. So NASA programmed it in the metric system, and Lockheed Martin programmed the actual hardware thinking that they were going to be getting numbers in the imperial system or the English system. So the software couldn't talk to the hardware, and the rover ended up crashing onto the planet because it just came in too hot, which means too fast. So if you want to find out more about that, I have a Martian exploration timeline, interactive timeline, up on my website. My website, by the way, is launched and I'm so excited by it. It's officeHoursWithML.com. And so you can find all my YouTube videos on there, also recordings of the live streams, some of them, not all of them, and also this interactive timeline. I'll definitely post it in the chat. So yeah, units important. So to go from kilometers to meters, basically I need to multiply it by 1,000, which means I just simply need to add 3 zeros, or 3 to the power of 10. Okay, now I kind of put a little space here. The reason for that, the distance is actually going to be twice of that because we're sending the pulse out, so it's going to travel that distance and then it's actually going to come back to us. So we need to multiply that distance by 2. So the time that it would take a signal to return to us would be (982 seconds. And again, the reason why it's in seconds is because the speed is in meters per second. So 982 seconds, that's a little bit hard to conceptualize. Let's put it into minutes. So in order to put it into minutes, again, there are 60 seconds in 1 minute. So I want to put the 60 on the bottom to cancel out the seconds. So if I divide that by 60, I get it's about 16.4 minutes. So that means if the sun was to just snap out of existence, which hopefully it will not, if the sun was to stop glowing, it would take us 8 minutes to actually notice. And it's one of those weird things to think about, that every time you're looking up at the night sky, even with a telescope, you're actually seeing the past. And in some instances, you're actually seeing the very, very far past because we can only see the light and the information carried in the light. And it takes our sunlight 8 minutes to reach us. So, yeah, just kind of think about that. When you look up in the night sky, you're seeing the past. So weird. So weird. So yeah, like it's possible that some of the stars that we see up in the sky aren't actually there anymore because they've either like burned out or something, but we're seeing like their remnants. I just think that's so cool. And like, it also makes me think why that like astronavigation must be kind of weird for the future, because I wonder if they're seeing like different star maps as you get further out. I don't know. That would be like a really cool thought experiment to do. But yeah, so basically using radar signals and radar pings, we're able to accurately measure the distances away from planets. We kind of still use old school observational methods to measure their year, or the amount of time it takes them to rotate once, and also the amount of time it takes them to revolve about their axis. So yeah, just kind of a lot of math, but I really wanted to go over unit conversions and manipulating of variables. So let's put the math aside for a little bit and actually kind of talk about how astronomy came to be and how it evolved over time. We still use some of the astronomy methods that our ancestors from the 1600s use, because it's still good. And ever since Galileo invented the telescope, we've just developed better telescopes. It's still a telescope and it's doing the same thing. And also now with all of our rovers, we're actually able to physically send objects away and then also retrieve samples from other planetary bodies. From the samples that we've collected from the moon, we were able to confirm that the moon was created by the collision of Earth and a planetoid. You know, like, we never would have been able to do that without space exploration. And so a lot of people are like, well, what's the importance of space exploration? You know, we have so much left, or we have so much to discover about Earth. And frankly, exploring space helps explain Earth. So we should definitely continue doing that. So to kind of give us a little bit of background of where we came from, I wanted to just kind of go over the history of astronomy, just really, really briefly. And you know me, I'm a math and science history nerd. I really like kind of seeing how these different theories have evolved. So, our man Aristotle, he was amazing at so many things, except for this thing. Aristotle, the brilliant philosopher, put all of his eggs in one basket, that the Earth is the center of the universe and everything revolves about the Earth. And if you think about it, this makes sense from an ancient perspective, because we are here on this planet, and yet we are thinking about where we came from and what is our place in the universe. So, of course, everything should revolve about Earth, because clearly we are destined to be the kings of the universe, sort of thing. This ideology carried enormous amount of weight, mostly because Aristotle was like the man. He was considered the apex of the learned individual. And the Catholic Church, throughout the Middle Ages and into the Dark Ages, really, really held on to this. And in fact, they kind of built some of their tenets upon it. And if a scientist wanted to refute this idea, they were labeled a heretic, and they were either imprisoned, executed, or tortured, or exiled from their country. Now, this doesn't mean that all men of religion were prescribers to the geocentric universe. In fact, Copernicus was a Polish priest, and based on his observations, he asserted that the sun is actually the center of our universe, or center of our solar system, and everything revolves around it. He did concede that the moon revolved around the Earth, just because we see it every day, and that just made sense. He didn't publish this until very, very late in his life, possibly because he feared repercussions from the Catholic Church. But luckily, he was able to publish it before he died, and kind of gain a following behind it. So this really rocked the world. And when Galileo made his telescope centuries later, he was able to kind of confirm this heliocentric model. So enter my main man Kepler. Johann Kepler was an assistant to Tycho Brahe, who, if you want to talk about interesting figures in history, look this dude up. My dude lost his nose in a duel, so he wore a fake nose. He also died from a bladder infection, and the legend is he wanted to be polite, so he didn't want to excuse himself to use the restroom during a dinner, so he held it, and that actually caused his bladder to explode. So there was probably like more things going on than just holding it. But besides all the colorful aspects of his life, he was an avid astronomer, and he took exceptionally detailed measurements of Mars and the movements of Mars. And upon his death, he passed it on to Kepler, um, and Johann Kepler was able to make very precise calculations about the orbit of Mars. And one of the main things that he realized is one, Mars does not orbit Earth, it orbits the sun. And the orbit shape of Mars is actually an ellipse. So that was his first law, that the planets move in ellipses, not circles. His second law is the law of equal areas, which is basically kind of like a conservation of momentum sort of thing. That because the planets are in an elliptical orbit, the sun is in the focus of one of the orbits. So there's going to be times where the planet is closer to the sun, and there's going to be times where the planet is further away. So, based on those movements of Mars, he noticed that Mars moved more swiftly when it was closer to the sun and slower when it was further away. And the area of those sectors being created were actually equal. And then by looking at the orbital period and the distance away from the sun, kind of comparing again the Martian orbital period and distance to the Earth orbital period and distance, he noticed that the square of the orbital period divided by the radius cubed is actually a constant. And so he hypothesized that this constant would hold true for all the planets in the solar system. Now, the thing is, okay, this song is kind of weird. Okay. I mean, we're talking about space, and the song's also talking about space, which is kind of funny. But the words were distracting. Um, he was only able to do these calculations for Mars. And it is kind of an antiquated way of looking at it. Another kind of little interesting tidbit about these two, Brahe was actually a geocentricist, and Kepler was a Copernican scholar, meaning that he believed in the heliocentricity of the solar system. So it's believed that Brahe kept these calculations away from Kepler because Brahe was afraid that Kepler would actually disprove geocentrism. I seriously want to find out more about these two. Definitely Brahe, just because he seems like such a character, and definitely like a my overhead camera is on. Oh, and it's, oh gosh. Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Dad, for letting me know. See, this is why I need to do this. What? I never transitioned. Sorry. Thank you. I mean, okay. Um sorry. One of these days I'll get it perfect. Um So yeah, they're just really, really interesting characters. So I would definitely want to find out more. Okay, then enter main man Newton. Totally the classical physicist of the day. He was inspired by Kepler's work, and um, based off Kepler's work, he actually developed his own three laws of the universe. The first is the law of inertia, meaning that an object at rest will remain at rest unless an outside force acts upon it. And the second one is probably the most important equation in all of physics. Everything can basically boil down to the second law, to Newton's second law, and it's basically saying that an object will not experience an acceleration unless it has a force acting upon it. So you might be like, oh, it's just a rewrite of the first law. And I mean, you're kind of right. Because mass is a measurement of inertia. And so the amount of acceleration that an object sees or experiences depends on the amount of force it experiences, but also the amount of mass. The more massive you are, the more force you can kind of absorb, if you will. So think of like a bug hitting your windshield, right? And then the third law is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We kind of talked about this in the problem of the week, where the the clown throwing the ring up causes the ring to actually exert an equal and opposite force on the clown, forcing him to become too heavy for the bridge. So, an adaptation of his probably like kind of his second law here is Newton's universal law of gravitation, which we used in our calculations earlier. Basically, Newton defined gravity as an attraction between two masses. And he also noticed that the attraction of gravity diminishes as the distance increases. So that is why the outer planets have kind of such lazy orbits. They have really long years. And that is because they aren't being pulled as hard by the sun to kind of whirl it around in its orbit. So, this law, when coupled up with Kepler's law, the t squared over r cubed, that's where we get our gravitational constant. So, Newton took Kepler's work and expanded it to more than just Mars and Earth. This law holds pretty darn true to all of the other planets. Now, again, we generally use this and we approximate the planetary motion as a circle, but they are ellipses. But yet, if we want to calculate the gravitational force, we just need to adjust the distance so that it properly maps out the distance in an ellipse. So, the big question is, if the sun is exerting a gravity on us, why don't we just go crashing into the sun? Well, the thing to note is that in order to keep moving around in a circle, you have to be experiencing that center seeking force. So, like the sparks here on this wheel, they actually are not being pulled down by anything. They're not being forced to go in a circle. So, they're just going to go in a straight line off the wheel. But this ball here, the way we imagine space, it's kind of like a piece of fabric that mass distorts the fabric of space time. The more massive you are, the more you kind of like pull down space. And the planet here is actually moving in a line, but because it's being pulled by that gravity, it's experiencing that kind of depression. So even though it's moving in a straight line, it gets pulled into a circle. So if we were to suddenly stop, say, rotating about our own axis, if the Earth was to stop rotating about its own axis, there would be nothing keeping us, um, there would be no way that we could kind of work against the gravitation of the sun, and we would eventually crash into the sun. So it is our rotation about our own axis that kind of keeps us in our orbit. What's also really interesting to note is that our solar system is moving through space. It's moving laterally through space. And so all of the planets as they go around are also slightly moving laterally. So we are not a static system at all. In fact, we are a dynamic system, and we're constantly moving and experiencing changes. And not only is our system moving, but our galaxy is moving. And there's just like a lot of really cool stuff that can happen when galaxies collide, or, when planets and planetoids collide. So I hope this kind of piqued your interest and your curiosity. If you have any sort of questions about the planets or about astronomy, please send me an email, drop me a Facebook message, send me a tweet. I would love to hear it. Your questions prove to be my inspiration for all the little YouTube videos I make, and also for these live streams. So, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you learned something new, and I hope it actually is going to inspire you to ask more questions about the world around you. Like, why do we have those little holes in the plug? Like, think about something that maybe you take for granted, and it's like, yeah, why is it like that? And drop me an email and we'll talk about it. So, I think I'm going to call it there. My voice is starting to go. So, I will be seeing you guys next week, and do be safe during April Fools. I'm thinking next week is, let's see, next Friday. I think it's the day after April Fools, if I am correct. Let me see. Yeah, it's the day after April Fools. So we are going to be talking about optical illusions and also magic tricks, kind of demystifying that. So that should be a lot of fun. And also how we perceive things and how we can be tricked. So that's going to be all the theme for April. So stick around, and I hope to see you next week. And you too, have a great night, Divya. All right. And everyone else, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next week.